Yeah. Oh, it works. It works. Welcome, everybody. I'm Michael Speaks. I'm Dean of the School of Architecture here at Syracuse. Thank you all for coming again tonight. Give a shout out to the 80 or 90 students and others upstairs in the spillover room. So, hi guys. Thanks for going up there. This is the second lecture of 3. These lectures are all finalists for to design the NVRC, the National Veterans Resource Complex. It's a building, as many of you know, that we're doing here on campus. First lecture was Snohetta last week. Tonight, shop, and next week, 1 week from now, on the 7th of April, David Ajay will lecture. One more shout out for lectures next week. We have a lecture on Tuesday by Byron Merritt, who is head of Nike Global Digital, Online, and Branding. It will also be a terrific lecture to see. But for tonight, we're here for the second lecture in the NVRC competition. Before I introduce the speaker and talk a little bit more about that, just note that for all, let's say, architects around the world, and certainly for students, you all may know that Zaha Hadid died today. It's a real shock. You probably will know that she is among the most important architects in the world, and certainly among the most influential. She died in Miami, and it's a huge, tragic, loss, I think, for all of architecture anyway. So. Very sad news. On to more bright and positive things. I'll want to introduce the lecture for tonight. SHOP, S-H, small o, capital S, capital H, small o, large P. Maybe Bill will talk about that a little bit. SHOP Architects started in 1996. Many of you will know it's really one of the most remarkable and remarkably organized architecture firms in the US and in the world. You will know many of the buildings that they've become famous for. Probably a lot in the news these days is 111 57th Street. Very, very super tall, amazing tower. I don't know if Bill's going to talk about that or not. The other building that you will all know is the Barclays Center in Brooklyn. They have done many more buildings and many more projects. You will know about those as well, but I just mentioned those two because they are often in the news and notable. And since our university is in the Final Four for both the men and women's teams, we have a special interest in basketball arenas. So Barclay is of a special interest to us here. Just one little quick anecdote. So you will all know a lot about their work. Bill's probably going to show a lot of their work. Tell just a quick story. Bill is a twin. His brother named Chris, and each of the teams, when they were selected, signed up for a date to come and visit the campus and get information about the campus. And when SHOP came, Chris came. And he came and we have a group of students who are involved in shadowing them, and we did an interview with them today. So those students met with Chris maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. And then the same students and I just did an interview with Bill, and when they all walked in, they looked at Bill and they weren't really sure he was the right guy or not. And in fact, he wasn't the right guy. He wasn't the guy they met the last time. But SHOP is, I recall doing some interviews with SHOP for some pieces I was writing some years ago. This was right, I think, when they had been selected for Barclay. And I was doing some interviews with him, and it impressed me that the firm is a big firm. It's a firm that does everything from accounting to software to construction to development to architecture to planning. But it really is a kind of a family operation in many senses. They all are related to each other, the five, not exactly, but well, let's see, Chris is related to his brother, obviously his twin brother, and he may talk about this. In any case, it's a very interesting and compelling and amazing office. Apart from all the great work they do, they're amazing people, and it's an interesting firm. I'm not going to say any more, except to say that we're thrilled to have William Sharples here tonight to lecture for us. We look forward to the lecture. We'll do the same format as we did last time. Bill will give a lecture of about an hour, and then we'll have questions afterwards. And there is, as you probably have seen, a reception down down one level. So without further ado, I want to introduce incredible architect, twin, and one of the founding members of Sharp Architects, Bill Sharples.
Thanks, Michael. Is this on? Can you hear me? Okay. Well, thank you for that. I do want to open up that, we did lose an important architect today, a very talented architect. Actually, I would kind of want to even open up the lecture with the fact that when I was at Columbia in the early 90s, Zaha actually came and did a lecture on her Vitra firehouse, which was just finishing up. And it was she hadn't really built anything at that point. She built this building, and there were 10 slides in the presentation, and they were all about the formwork and the rebar for this concrete firehouse, which was somewhat surreal. And she said, "These are so beautiful. I think these are the most beautiful." It's almost like I hated having to cover it up. But she said, after I realized how complicated it was, I don't know if I would have done the building the way I would have done it if I knew it was as complicated. And I was really shocked when I heard that, because I was a structural engineer in the 80s working in concrete, and my reaction was like, well, I thought she would have known that. And I think in terms of form and expression and iconography, goes hand in hand, at least for us at Shop, with how things are made, how things are processed. But at the same time, there's a balance where you don't want to compromise an opportunity because you know too much. So it's a very fine line, and I always found that moment, especially because I think I was even in first year at that point, that at that point in time, it was actually an interesting observation she made. I also want to let you know that Greg Pasquarelli is a Villanova alum. He was a cheerleader during the 1985 Villanova-Georgetown game, and he will be in Houston. Hopefully these two teams don't meet up, because we have a lot of Syracuse alum in the office. But anyway, I know Greg has lectured here. I think Chris has lectured here, and I think there will be some overlap. But one thing about the partners, we all talk about things a little differently. There's certain things we focus on. What I want to focus on tonight is design, process, our process of design, and how does that lead to architecture? When we finished Columbia, I finished Columbia and I was just turning 30. It was the early 90s, had worked as an engineer, and I get out, and this is like what we've greeted with, this idea of separation. Either you're making or you're theorizing. And this was a real problem, especially in the standpoint that when I was working as an engineer, studying as an engineer, the architects that most influential were to me was Frank Lloyd Wright, Lou Sullivan, Mies, Saarinen, Lou Kahn. These were architects that did everything. They created, they innovated, they worked with materials, they designed, they built. And then suddenly you're greeted with this. Ironically, it wasn't a surprise. The rest of the four of us all kind of had the same reaction. We all met at Columbia. Chris is my identical twin brother. Corey, my partner and spouse. Greg was my housing partner, and then Kim and Greg got married. So it's definitely a family group, and I'm sure Greg has told you three of us have the same birthday on top of it. So, But the thing is, we all came from very different backgrounds, and we really questioned it. Why would we prescribe ourselves to making a decision about whether we were going to be a maker or a thinker? We started the process right out of the gate with the idea that we were going to do everything. We were going to teach, we were going to theorize, we were going to look at new ways of developing means and methods, and we were going to design, and we were going to create architecture. And you know, when you think of it in those terms, you start asking yourself questions. And you know, we're in our early 30s, mid 30s, and it's just like you gave up this other career to do this, and now you're passionate about it, but you also want to kind of connect it to that history, that 10 years prior, and start thinking about, well, why am I doing this? What am I after? What am I trying to create? Ultimately, all 5 of us wanted to create architecture. We wanted to make things, but we wanted to understand why and what we were making and what we were driving to create. We have been recognized for being innovative in the field of architecture, but for us, what was really amazing about Fast Company was we were ranked 33 within all disciplines. And for us, that was exciting because that meant architecture was kind of creeping out of the building. It was more about problem solving. That's what's so exciting about architecture school. You don't necessarily have to do architecture. I have so many friends who have gone into filmmaking, industrial design, software development, and so architecture is just a great academic opportunity to not only think about, you know, buildings, but also to think about other challenges that face us. The other element that we focused on really early on, because when we were at Columbia, it was Mylar, it was trace, it was pen and ink, it was pencil, it was great. But we would come out and the paperless studios were just starting. We were starting to think about, well, you know what, the plan and section, it's not too great. I had a terrible time with plan and section as an engineer. You can hide a lot, you lose a lot of data in plan and section. And so I think we all immediately said, well, let's start to think about how we can represent our work. And what we did early on, in this case, the camera obscura, was we started developing drawing sets and models that started to think about, well, how do buildings get put together, but more importantly, how do you begin to communicate these ideas to the people who are going to actually put them together? And our focus here was really on craft, you know, the perfect weld, the perfect cut, the perfect torque down bolt. The idea is that we didn't want someone to worry about how long it was. What was the angle? Did I get the arrangement right? We wanted to work on delivering a document set where people could focus on making and really exploring a way in which they could assemble a building that at the end of the day they were proud of because they didn't expect it. That's always the great surprise. And the other thing is that it looks like it's been well put together. So again, looking at how we use software to develop documentation that communicates how things go together in a logical manner. The other thing that, from an innovation standpoint, is we go and look at a lot of other things that we're interested in. You know, Chris is married to Anna Dyson. She runs CASE. She's one of the scientists that developed this solar concentrated integrated concentrated solar facade system, which has been in development for the last 6 years. We're actually going to commercialize this by the end of the year. It's going to go in a project next year. But it's basically a tracking system that's between 2 elements of glass. It's basically got a Fresnel, or what we call kind of a headlight, that focuses light on basically a PV chip that produces, you know, electricity. It also, at the same time, tracks and is a daylighting control device. And at the same time, from that result, you know, collects heat, electricity, and its efficiency is quite good. It's around 86% compared to what you would find in a typical PV, which is in the low 20s, mid 20s, 22 range. The ultimate goal with this system, though, is it's architecture. It's not an application. It's not something you stick on the building. It's part of the building. It's part of the space. And that's something that, in particular, Anna, as an architect, is always focused on in her work. And for us, it's very exciting because it's actually something that's going to perform and get us closer, hopefully, to a net zero concept. The other areas which, you know, Greg is focused on, and Corey, is development. And one of the things we do in our office is We work with a lot of developers. We look at sites, and one of the challenges is, you look at hundreds of sites a year. You determine, what can you build on that site? And what we've developed in-house, and we're going to be commercializing this year, is a software that anyone can use. That basically you go to a site, and it basically tells you what you can build on it, and how much it's going to cost. And you can do it on your handheld device. And so you start to think about anywhere, at least in New York City, you'll be able to walk around and start to think about what you can do. Now, this could be influential in urban planning. This could be influential in development. It could be influential in city politics. But this is something that has been driving us for the last 20 years, is that, reinventing the wheel. This is a process that we think will play a big role, not only in New York, but globally, looking forward in terms of the future development of our cities. The other area, again, going back to construction, means and methods. New York City, the mayor is committed to 20,000 units of affordable housing. New York is very expensive to build in. We are looking at other ways to deliver construction. So we've committed a lot of resources to development of modular construction. And the challenge with modular construction is everyone has to believe in it. Everyone on the team has to commit. And if there's one weak link, it won't work. And that's been one of the challenges with what we've had with this particular project, is that the construction industry is not totally supportive of modular construction. The unions have a big issue with modular construction. And this is something that, from politics to means and methods, enter into the discussion. That's something that we, as architects, are still trying to resolve. But this building will be completed. It will top out in June of this year. It's 35 stories, and it's 350 units of affordable housing. The other element we're looking at is new types of construction. The concept of wood towers in urban environments. We're working with the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the various soft lumber councils to bring the first tall wood building, a 10-story, 15-unit building in Chelsea. The idea with wood is, again, how do we limit carbon? I mean, we think about wood. A building this size sequesters around 1,600 tons of carbon. In the traditional sense, a concrete building releases about 600 tons of carbon. So you start to think about, with the situation in our planet and planning new cities, new communities, and the idea of density is good, how do we start to use natural resources to promote a better stewardship of our environment? But more importantly, this is not drywall. This is not applique. This is what actually, I grew up in an old farmhouse in Pennsylvania. I mean, natural materials there's something rich, authentic, beautiful about natural materials, and this is something that really is also somewhat going to drive the market in New York, that people really want this. A lot of our focus the last 20 years has been work in New York, but when the crash happened in 2008, we realized we had to diversify ourselves. We made that mistake. It was a very tough period in our office, but one thing that we didn't want to change is that if we worked abroad, we were going to do it the same way we did it in New York. We are not an office that pumps out design. We're an office that really focuses on those particular projects, like the one up here we're trying to win. We commit full resources to the design. So when we work abroad, our staff live abroad. We have people living, 5 people living in Melbourne. We have 3 people living in Botswana, South Africa, where they're running the iRoom. People living in Mexico City and San Francisco. When we move work abroad, we kind of take the process in which we develop here and translate it into other cultures. And that's what's very exciting about it, is the fact that technology is scalable, the process is scalable. And what's really exciting is when you work in places like Kenya and Botswana and you start using software that the locals start using. I mean, Rhino, Revit. And they're working in 3D, and then they start to understand the value of the iRoom. This is something that really, really drives a lot of the energy, especially the staff in the office. But ultimately, let's talk about design and how do we start to think about it. Well, Alberti said mathematics, both art and science are grounded in mathematics, beauty and performance. We like to look at these three together, and they form design. But that's not all that determines design, and that's not all that gets us to architecture. And again, I'm going to be very, I don't want to be subjective here, but there's a process that we feel that we talk about in terms of what are those other elements, those other forces that actually ultimately get us to where we really want our work to go. And in a sense, and it's not necessarily about the form, it's about the experience. I'll be honest with you, if the building is ugly, but everyone loves it because it's just a great space to be in and so forth, that is architecture. So the first one we start with is politics. Politics in this day and age, especially during the campaign season we're in right now, is not a very good word. But in terms of what we're talking about here, is that we're in the public realm. And that means engaging the community, that's engaging government, that's engaging policy. Our first project was Mitchell Park that we started in the late 90s and finished in the early 2000s. What we learned from this park that was in a village of 2,000 was we could not have ever conceived of this design without this engagement in the public process. And we're not talking about compromise here. We're talking about engaging and listening and developing a strategy in terms of moving an architecture forward, a design forward, that the public and the design team and ultimately the people that will use it down the road will celebrate and love. The East River Waterfront, a project we started in 2004, it's still going on. 7 neighborhoods, 2 community boards, Army Corps, Department of Environmental Conservation, Department of State, Empire Development Corps, plethora of agencies, communities. You got to diagram it. You got to understand, how do you feed information? How do you present? What are the feedback loops? And ultimately, you do this early on. You don't do it after you've done the design and then kind of trying to, it's a process. It's an iterative process. The East River Waterfront, for us, is this dark, it's about 1.8 million, goes from the Battery up past the Manhattan Bridge. And you can, I don't know if you can see it, but you can see the outline of Central Park. There are 3 parks. West 8 did Governors, and Michael Van Valkenburg did Brooklyn. Combination of 3 parks, huge open space, huge in terms of its impact in lower Manhattan. We're lucky that our park is one of the only south-facing parks in New York, so there was an advantage there to that in terms of how we developed the program. But the challenge with our park was, as a result of the FDR and infrastructure, it was cut off, the city was cut off from its waterfront by parking, by fencing, by garbage. And how do we reconnect our city? How do we begin to reconnect these 7 neighborhoods back to this edge condition and make it really meaningful, make it part of the community, not make it something that was tacked on to the edge? Well, New York and its 5 boroughs are made up of about 500 miles of waterfront edge conditions. We looked at these, some good, some bad, and ours was pretty bad. South Street, Pearl Street, very wide streets, parking. We had an elevated 6-lane highway, piers that were falling apart. But we looked at a lot of this as assets. The FDR in particular, we saw the FDR as an opportunity to start to look at placing community programs, pavilions. We eliminated the parking. We looked at ways in which to develop landscapes that we could start to create pocket parks, reduce the size of the streets, introduce bike lanes and pedestrian ways. And ultimately, the idea was that the Esplanade wasn't going to be this narrow stretch, but it was going to be expansive. It was going to be expansive out into the water. We're going to think about how we can start to, in a sense, create opportunity through section, and figuring out how we could begin to make viable landscapes. And this is where the south-facing light comes in very handy. I mean, I would say if the orientation on this park was different, we would have a very different result. But because of this, we were able to create a landscape that could be actually inhabited. It became the backdrop of the Esplanade. Other elements such as, well, we had a 42-inch railing. We wanted to try and address sightline issues, so we made bar seating where people during the day eat lunch. On the weekends, they fish from. We created get-downs where people could experience the East River in different locations in different ways. We work with the DOT to paint the underside of the FDR to highlight it, to again make it a 24/7 experience. And then most importantly, creating pavilions where they would be revenue generating and that they would ultimately take care of the upkeep of the park. The other areas that we're working on are 3 piers. The first one, Pier 15, is completed. It was completed about a year and a half ago. This particular pier was a structure that was falling apart. Our immediate reaction was, well, let's try and double the size. We found out from the Department of Environmental Conservation there was a shade issue on the East River that they would not allow for environmental reasons. And we also realized piles are very expensive. So in order to kind of maximize this idea of open space and program, we created a double-decker pier. So with maritime programs on the bottom and a green park on top. And this is it today. This is taking a picture at night. Again, similar to the FDR, highlighting the underside of the surface, the belly, in this light that really just accentuates it, not only in the horizon, but also in terms of the spaces within the pier itself. And then various market, ferry terminal service, and then incorporating landscaping, not only in a lower level, but more importantly in this elevated park. And this is Tuesday afternoon around lunchtime. So we have sunbathers, we have Wall Street people eating the lunch, and we have tourists. And it's just like a Central Park moment, except you've got this beautiful view of the Brooklyn Bridge, Governor's Island. And again, it's become something of a significant moment within the neighborhood. We incorporated amphitheater steps as viewing towards the tall ships, boardwalks, and overlooks back to the Esplanade. Again, using materials that were reflective of the area of the sea, the edge condition, metal, wood, and stone. Pier 35 is currently under construction. And then Pier 17, which is topping out this week, is a macrocosm of Pier 15, except at the base it's made up of food halls, and then the center section, which is, you see this glazing, is a retail, and then on the top is a public space with a restaurant. And the idea of the ground plane was to kind of take the programs of the historic Front Street, which were small boutique restaurants, cafes, retail, and incorporate that in the lower level. Open area in the summer and spring and fall, and then in the winter the doors would come down with views out to the river. But this is really where it comes back in terms of becoming a place that becomes different things to many people. In the idea of concerts, skating in the wintertime, which we do skate down. I lived in this community for 5 years. We would set up the rink on Fulton Street, and it would be packed. Summer movies. And then, again, getting back to kind of the historic qualities of the industrial factory sheds that were on the East River. So we're using kind of this industrial glass, this 40-foot high door that actually moves up. This is what will move up on a track that will open the lower level retail spaces, food market up during the summer, spring, and fall, and then we'll be closed in the wintertime. The other element, which I know Greg's lectured about this one, is the first project, a development project we did, finance. And finance is also correct. Finance is a dirty word typically with us architects, because we're kind of going over to the dark side. But ultimately for us, it's how do you get into the process where you can actually be part of the decision making. And money is a big driver. And for us, the opportunity here is that we saw a property, a site in meatpacking that was up and coming. When this site was looked at in 1999, meatpacking was not what it is today. You didn't have Chelsea Market, you didn't have Apple, you didn't have Alexander McQueen, you didn't have any of it. It was pretty raunchy. But this was just a beautiful building. It was a 1905 warehouse in pretty good condition, and we saw an opportunity. The key with bidding on a site is figuring out how you can make it work and put in the highest number so you outbid your other guys and still make a lot of money. So it's who's smarter. And so for us, immediately it's looking like, well, let's try and get more area on the site, so let's buy someone's air rights. Well, the layouts aren't really working that well. Let's see if we can get some light and air rights. So we'll buy those too so we can cantilever it out. And then you say, but they're still not working, so let's work with our engineers and figure out a way to develop a central core and what we call a couple condition to really get efficient layouts. And boy, this is going to be profitable now. Now we're going to throw in a good number and we win the project. And it was during that process that this relationship with this developer started to develop into a sense of trust. And he said, okay, well, we want it. So now I'm going to let you guys kind of do what you want to do to a certain degree, but you're going to have to prove it out through the process. And so we said, well, this is fantastic. This is our first somewhat ground-up building, major building in New York. And so how do we begin to celebrate the historic architecture with this contemporary architecture? Well, one, we were definitely going to use authentic material, in this case zinc. The other thing was starting to understand the language of the facade relative to the historic language. And this depth, this thickness, this pattern, creating a kind of a unique residential experience for all the units. So right away you start to think, well, how do I create this? How do I manage this complexity? And you start looking at, well, we have 4 zinc panel sizes, we have 3 window types, and then we have 2 light boxes. And how do you begin to manage that? Well, one is obviously managing the amount of material, and this is the first time we started taking material, nesting it into the raw material. We used the software that the fashion industry uses to cut clothes from. The software came out of Milan. We used it to nest the zinc. And then we developed spreadsheets where we could then track which panels were which because we numbered them all. And this is what allowed the carpenters and the contractor to begin to able to kind of understand the logistics on site of what things were and when they would go into the building. And the building, it was the first rain screen in New York, a true rain screen. It's basically, all your envelope is behind this, so this actually this breathes, and it came in quite under budget. And this is the first time where we felt that being able to have a seat at the table, being able to work directly with the contractor and developer rather than being cut off, gave us the sudden confidence that, wow, we can manage tolerance, we can deliver quality, and we can deliver something that we believe is architecture. And that's really, once you've done it once, then you're kind of like, oh, well, what am I going to do next? What's going to be it? But the building blocks at this point, now we're at 2003, we had done the camera obscura. Porterhouse was the next kind of the next link to this process. But for us, it was the first time we did a development project, and because of this project, we were able to finance our office to move down to Lower Manhattan. And it was great. It was great until 2008, when then you get burned. And you think, architecture can solve everything. Well, it doesn't solve everything, especially when the bank goes bankrupt that's financing the project. And that's something you learn. And that's one thing we do now. We're doing market research. We know the economy is changing. We know the real estate market is changing. And we're kind of preparing for that. And that's something that we recommend everyone to think about. It's that you don't get yourself caught into this vacuum where you start to not think about what your next steps will be. The other element of design that's critical is social responsibility. And that's twofold. That's, for us, it's the environment, and it's also the culture we work and live in. And it's a very broad spectrum, but I'll try and cross it in terms of some of the work we've done over the last 10 years. The first opportunity we worked with a client that was really kind of outside the box was Google. This started in around 2007. They asked us to work on a master plan on their Mountain View campus, and then we were given the opportunity to work on their first ground-up building. Larry and Sergey are data-driven. They do care about design, but at the end of the day, it can't be subjective. It's got to be married with a logic that definitely engages the Google experience of how they think, how they innovate, and what landscape. So it's very much of an open architecture. Whether it's circulation, whether it's relationship to open space, whether it's work groups, neighborhoods, these all are building blocks that they understand. And if the building's form all follows that, and it's beautiful, that's great, but at the end of the day, it's all about these armatures for how they work within their spaces. And then developing morphologies in which we developed, this was a parametric model we developed where they asked, well, we want to see a lot of possibilities. We want to see, if you take various forms, and we would sketch some of these forms, we want to look at, well, how big can the building be? How does it fit the master plan on site? Is it environmentally sound? Does it get us closer to a net zero structure? And what we arrived at was a form that really was all about its surface and about its circulation. And between the two, they engaged these two relationships and formed what we call an energy blanket, an active-passive surface that just, it's amorphous in a sense because it changes shape based on the relationship of what's happening inside and what it needs to do as it relates to environmental performance. They even looked at it in terms of the car, that they see the car leaving, and so they wanted to develop a plinth where that could be reprogrammed over time into workspace. But in the current condition, it was going to be utilized car. And then we start kind of interpreting what this energy blanket could be, what open spaces could be. And again, this is something that we still do. Even though we are very focused on technology, the idea of the sketch, the idea of the vision is still very much part of the process. And then using the scale circulation, the superhighway, which begins to form the morphology of how the form of the building comes together and connects the floors to the streets of the floors that start to define the relationship of neighborhoods to kind of the internal experiences within the neighborhoods, which we kind of reflect on as kind of like the medieval hill town. And we're talking about elevation changes in the neighborhoods. There's this idea that as you go further deeper in the building, that you still have these views to the outside. So it's not a flat surface we're talking about. We're talking about shifting in section. And then beginning to look at program. But what's exciting about it is that between the environment and between the way the interior works, we end up with an architecture that we could never have arrived at any other way. The frustrating thing with this project is September 23rd, 2008 comes along, and Google's a publicly traded company. They're not going to go build a new building. Their shareholders wouldn't appreciate it, so the project was canceled. And then, things change. And we still do work with Google, but we're not directly involved in any current master plan, but it was really frustrating. Well, it was really frustrating for the team that worked on the Google project, and one of them found this competition, open competition. And we don't typically do unpaid competitions, but this was in a situation in our office where we lost a third of our work in about a 30-day period, and we had all these talented designers that said, let's go for it. This innovation hub in Gaborone, Botswana, same principles. The president of Botswana is looking, Botswana is step back. Botswana is about the size of France, 2 million, population 2 million. Their main export is diamonds and beef. And this president was looking for, well, what are we going to do when we run out of diamonds? So he wanted to invest in Botswana's future and build a tech hub for basically young startups in the region. So, the sun in Botswana is not in the south, it's in the north. So we just flipped this section. So we used this in the diagram on the competition boards. We took all the Google data and we put it in there, and they loved it. But at the end of the day, you also have to look at, it's got to be a building of Botswana, though. And so you think of the Okavango Delta and the Kalahari Desert, these incredible landscapes, and you interpret it into an architecture. Now, this is the competition still. We haven't even gotten to, what are we designing? So it's this kind of, this is our interpretation of those experiences, those two landscapes. But the most important thing, if you look at it, you don't see any parking lot. The landscape comes right up to the building. And that's really, it's about touching the ground lightly. It's about, we've got monkeys, and we're not talking about the contractors. We're talking about wild monkeys, occasional lions, lots of goats, and they're all wandering. And so we really wanted to create a building that really engaged its landscape. And so the energy blanket was translated into bars that were connected by internal gardens and bridges. And then they were basically embedded with PVs, green roofs, water retention ponds or wells. We placed all the parking under this green roof plinth under the building to eliminate the heat sink around and again bring the landscape towards. Developed a rain screen system that would basically self-shade and then using hollow core slabs to deliver air and increase the thermal mass of the building. All done. And this project is under construction, will be finished towards the end of this year, first quarter next year. It's shocking working in a country that has just started to build, to have this variety of technology being implemented, and we're very excited about the fact that the client is so committed to this. The thing that we're surprised about is Greg and I flew over after we won, and we walked the site, and they had already done a master plan, and on the site they had groves of these 150-year-old marula trees, which they were going to cut down to put streets, and we're going to be like, you're crazy. This is like perfect. You want these to be part of the architecture. You want kind of this existing landscape. So we actually redid the master plan, saved the trees, and started rethinking how the building would be sited so we can start incorporating some of the trees, the marula trees, actually into the complex. So this is one of the internal courtyard gardens during the competition evolved, and then obviously doing, all the energy analysis we do in-house. We do work with consultants, but we do it in-house initially because it's important for us to be able to rationalize a concept that we feel is grounded in performance data. The first phase of the building is about 250,000 square feet. This is what's under construction. It's 3 bars. The north bar, the bar farthest away, is a biotech house. It will be run by the Ministry of Health. It's mainly for HIV research. The center bar is engineering and shared conference facility, and the third is another engineering bar, all connected by shared amenity and conference room bridges. Another thing that the client stressed to us was it had to be a Botswana and reflect, the craft and the capability. And now we're looking at, we're building this somewhat contemporary building, but we are going to use local craftspeople to start, developing some of the materiality of the surface. This is the drum of the auditorium, 300-seat auditorium that is in the head bar. We met with a craftsperson, furniture designer, Peter Mayabeo, who introduced us to artisans. The baskets in Botswana are put in a museum. They are well crafted. It's hundreds of years in terms of crafted culture, and we met with the weavers. We started to understand in terms of how do you begin to rationalize a structure. So we kind of sketch up ideas or parameters of how we could represent that structure. And then we use grasshopper rhino, which I know some of you guys use, and we begin to test those out in terms of color, frame, density, and then we print it. And what was exciting about the prints is that when we presented it to the client picked the screen off the print. He didn't prick it, it was all about feeling. And it was just like he related it to it in terms of the basket and the actual object. And for us, that's how you will feel it as you walk through the building. You will touch this wall. We then started printing and doing versioning of the various panels because now we had to start to think about how we were going to actually clad this surface that had somewhat of a complex geometry. We started, CNC, and then Peter, who took up Rhino, his guy learned Rhino, he started modeling it, and basically he had to come into a budget, but he was able to come up with a panel size that was actually quite different from what we thought the scale should be. But in order for it to be able to turn and for him to be able to replicate something that was effective from a cost standpoint, it created a higher density, which at the end of the day created this kind of very much of a woven wall. It's still a basket, but it's a very different kind of reading that we initially had started out with. And this is what we were very excited about from the standpoint that there was still another level of reinterpretation based on the capacity to make this wall. So it's the entry lobby of the Innovation Hub. It forms the backdrop for the bar and the restaurant, which are under the conference facility. And this is where you go for breakfast or lunch or dinner. You don't necessarily have to stay on campus, but that's what it was used for. And then the interior of the auditorium, which is defined by this wall, that's the basket. We took the hexes and we actually interpreted them onto a frame and then backlit it, and this is the interior of the auditorium. So again, using local materials, local craftspeople, these two elements will be built by companies in the country. I'm just quoting the amenities bridge that serves the auditorium. We have full functioning lab space, engineering floors. Microsoft will be in the building, shared conference rooms, hubs, internal courtyards. And then this is what greets you. And at night, the basket will be lit, and that's really what, that's the underside of the Pier 15. That's what your eye goes to. It will have the largest brown roof in southern Africa, because that's where everything is, except for 2 months out of the year. And this is an image of the project last November. It's kind of looked like an aircraft carrier, grounded aircraft. But this is the cantilever of the auditorium. This cantilever is as long as the Barclays one. And this one's in concrete. And then these are one of our guys working with our locals in the I room, coordinating the 3D model. We have 3 people doing that who have been living there for about 2 years now. We have Rebecca, who's down in Cape Town working with a fabricator right now, we're joint ventured in. We're doing the virtual design construction files. These are the files that the fabricator actually cuts and bends from to produce the rain screen. And then these are just a few pictures. This is the interesting part. This is what happens after 5 o'clock. The critters come out, and it's great. I mean, we got more pictures of the animals on the site than we have of the construction right now. Which brings us to Uber, and this is a project we landed about a year and a half ago. Uber's headquarters in San Francisco. We're working on a number of innovation districts, and Miami, Philadelphia, Boston, and planning is changing because people don't want to own cars. They want to be able to walk, take public transportation. They want to be where the action is, live, work, play. And Travis gets that. No one wants to commute to Mountain View on an hour-and-a-half bus ride. He doesn't know how tripped out the bus is. People want to live in San Francisco. So he's building his headquarters in the Mission District of San Francisco. And we looked at it in terms of what is Uber about? Uber is about connection. It's about movement. And Travis does all his meetings walking around. He's going from one space to another. His staff are very much the same way. And we took kind of the topography of the streets, the sectional streets of San Francisco, kind of flipped it and kind of created this internal city that begins to connect neighborhoods, connects across buildings, across parks, and becomes really not only an organizer, but a celebration of what is going to happen in this building. Again, taking the idea of the street and the sectional relationship, how that morphology starts to find itself in terms of an architecture. But at the end of the day, creating a building that's all about projecting the energy, the conversation, the experience on the street, and the experience looking back at the street. Through the bridges, through using natural materials, glass, wood, steel. Creating this experience that people are seeing things and something is going on. And then looking at the street, and we call the street the solarium. It's a very active experience, active space, but it's also a place where people meet, contemplate. So we're looking at a combination of this idea of wood and travertine surfaces. This idea that you're down on street level on the sidewalk and you can actually look up through it. And so this just gets something, it's actually surprising when you deal with the tech company, they tend to be, yeah, we want to be completely open, but yes, we also want to be completely secure. And no one wants to be called out as big brother, but Travis is just like, it's been quite an interesting ride with him in terms of this dialogue between the public realm and the experience of working within this office. The other thing that was really critical was that the building breathed. And because of the climate in San Francisco, the possibility of opening this building up, unlike what we were able to do less of in the East Coast, was something that we began to focus on. Obviously doing the energy modeling and coming up with a pneumatic system, worm drive system, ran off BMS, that allowed the building to kind of automatically change depending on the conditions inside and the conditions outside. And again, playing up with the idea of green walls, green planters, screens, daylighting control, and ultimately creating a building that's always in this kind of theatrical flux. So not only in terms of the energy and light, people moving inside, but that the facade was performing. And then we get to theory. Theory is the hardest one because clients do not like to be guinea pigs. Well, occasionally you do get one. And it's not so much a guinea pig, he's just got a program that he doesn't know, or they're trying to understand in terms of how could this benefit a neighborhood, or in this case, a district. So I'm not going to tell you where it is, and you probably figure out where it is, but this particular challenge was for institutions. And though none of the four could be privileged. So you had to create a structure of armature in which all four could inhabit, yet be represented equally and have the same opportunity. In this case, we kind of took these four cylinders, rotate them so they would all have 3 exposures, and then we introduced a tower for revenue generation. That's it. And then looking at, in terms of the ground plane, these kind of lines of desire, again, going back to some of the things I've said about the innovation district and innovation hubs, creating a condition that's not just about retail, it's about exhibition, it's about making. And how does these lines of desire start to form the structure and the form of the architecture, how it becomes the bridges between the institutions, the conference facility, and ultimately defining the interior forms and programs of the building. And this is, for us, is the most exciting part with all our projects, is that, yes, we do rely on digital models and renderings, but really for us, the process of making the architecture in the Fab Lab, and the Fab Lab is in the heart, on the 11th floor of the Woolworth Tower in Lower Manhattan. We print, we cut, and we have fun. You can see Greg's about to leave for a meeting, he's going to be late for, but we are just, this is where we really get the energy in terms of what the spaces are going to begin to feel like, what they could be. And the model that's providing the cut files is the same model we're using to design. It's the same model, CATIA model, that we will use to actually make the files for the actual construction documents. And then some concepts of what some of these spaces are going to be. I'm not going to say anything about space, so I just got. And it's changing, so all the models are made at shop, and it's, for us, this is a critical process as I said, in our work. The last ingredient I'll leave on is technology. And again, I know Greg's lectured on Barclays, so I'm going to kind of focus on the other end of Barclays a little more, the technology side. Means and methods, as I said, is the biggest challenge for architects. In our contractual documents, we are not supposed to tell the contractor anything. We're not supposed to point anything out. We're supposed to kind of keep our mouths shut. And then for us, if you really want to own the process, you have to engage the workforce. You have to understand what their risks and their motivations are, and then you need to attack those. You need to respond to it. For us, pictorial representation, sequencing, building models is for us the easiest. I never read the directions when I built models. Well, Chris and I were dyslexic too on top of it, so it didn't help. But we looked at space, we looked at numbers, we looked at sequence, we all build Legos, we all build things from IKEA. You don't need written directions. Well, contractors are actually pretty good without written directions, and that's something, and that's not to take away that the point here is you can hide a lot in the specifications. You can hide a lot in the plans and sections. The point is it's all about building this relationship of trust, because you guys are going into battle together, doing hopefully for the same reason. They want to be profitable, we want to be profitable, but we also want to do a great building, and they want to do a great building. Barclays was about $800 million project. It was a big project. This was the big one for us. And it came to us in a very strange way, 18,000-seat basketball arena. But Frank Gehry was the first architect, and he did the master plan, and he did an amazing master plan. This is the first arena that actually incorporated a mixed-use residential community. 4 towers surrounding the arena with a green roof, like an elevated park. Problem is, 2008 again, and the client needed to get the project off the ground. He could not afford to build the 4 towers. Frank wasn't really interested in doing a whole new design, and there was going to be a budget issue. And so he hired a design-build company, and the design-build company just basically took a field house from another city and plopped it right down in the middle of Brooklyn. The city didn't react very well to that and told the client, you better find an architect and fix this. We were given the opportunity, and this is what we got. I think we all call the hat box. So bestoke the hat box. How do we start to create an architecture when we're told the steel for the structure's been bought, the interior program's all set, the bowls all fixed, the foundations have been designed. You can't change anything, but you got to create some architecture. And so it says, for us, it was actually refreshing, because if they say, do whatever you want as long as you don't change anything, that actually gave us a lot to work with. So when looking back at how you begin to measure the strategies, again, this connection with the pedestrian, this transparency at grade, this relationship to the row houses in the context of Brooklyn, and its relationship with the concourse looking out. And then ultimately this idea of the icon, the building in the Brooklyn skyline, and how it would become a centerpiece within that context. And how that starts to break down the form into these kind of the halo, the canopy, the ground plane. Looking in, looking out. But what was missing was the civicness of this. I mean, Flatbush and Atlantic Avenue, 2 major avenues, a transportation stop, 11 subway lines, 1 rail line, Long Island. We focused on this idea of a canopy that came out, that we opened up to the sky, placed the marquee interior into it to basically internalize the experience, but also not to shoot light out into the community, and really make it about a moment for the public, not necessarily someone going there, but someone coming off the subway that could experience, this space, experience the Oculus, and if they wanted to, they could actually get a glimpse into the game and see if the Nets were losing again. And then Brooklyn. Brooklyn is not Manhattan. Brooklyn is gritty. Brooklyn built aircraft carriers. Brooklyn had its own baseball team once. It was there, and the new culture of Brooklyn, it is about authenticity. It's about making. It's about craft. And how do we capture that? And so, well, one was we started to need to think about the form. And since we knew what we were not allowed to touch, we had a lot of freedom. This is 4 days in the process. We hadn't gotten the project yet. And Bruce Ratner, the client, was over in Prague negotiating with Prokop about joint venturing the Nets. We sent him the image. He got off the plane, directly came to our office, and he said, I'm very excited. What can you do in 2 months? Because I need to go in front of City Hall. And this is what we gave City Hall 2 months later. And what's exciting about this image is that's what it looks like today. Now, I would say, we go through evolutions. We like the idea that the design will change right up to the moment you place the last panel. Believe it or not, the design did change dramatically. It just looks like it didn't. Where it changed was the fact is that we really had to bestow the weathered steel facade. And we chose weathered steel because, again, it's a reflection of the brown, the grittiness, and the rawness of what Brooklyn, for us, reflected. But how do we start to manage schedule and cost? The steel prices changed 3 times during the period that this building was under design development. That means up to the point you hit the button to cut the steel. And every time it changed, we would have to adjust the suit. And so we came up with a parametric model. Again, you spend all the energy building this master model, and then when they go and say, well, we need to lose 20% in the halo or 15% in the canopy, and we're able to adjust this in the formal model and then take that data and adjust it in the actual build model. So the patterns of these 12,000 unique weathered steel panels on 900 mega panels could be adjusted right up to the point we were ready to make the actual panel. And it gave us confidence that even when we got that bad news, it always seemed to be Friday afternoon, we knew by the middle of next week we had solved it and we still had a building intact. The other aspect was developing families that begin to create a logic for how this complex geometry would go together, the skin back up with the building envelope, and then developing a numerical or an automated shop drawing system. We had joint venture with the fabricator who was going to make this in Indiana. He did not have the digital equipment in his factory to cut this. This was all going to be done manually. So we had to make 12,000 shop drawings. Well, our guys developed an automated system in 2 weeks where all the variables that were going to be needed, and then again, if the panel changed at the last minute, you just change the variable, it produced the shop drawing, punched out, and it went right out on the factory floor. Same with the nesting. So again, it was a waste of paper, but at the same time, we weren't physically drawing these things. These were all automated through a digital program. And then this is where it comes down to trust. Do I believe this is going to work? And I'm talking about the contractor, the bank, the client. We have 12,000 panels. We can only do a batch, 3 batches at a time because of the size of the building. These have to go through a wet-dry cycle for 3 months. So at the end of 3 months, they're supposedly aged 10 years. Yeah, and believe me, they weren't doing initially what they were supposed to. We had metallurgists in here, and they were all changing the temperature, the moisture, and everything. But they're all blending out now. But the point was that, the challenge here was like, how do I get paid for the material I cut, bent, I'm weathering? Me, the client, the contractor, how do I know I'm paying for what I'm getting? So we developed, like UPS, FedEx, a barcode system, put it on an app, and created digital dashboards. So the client, the bank, the contractor, fabricator, we always knew whether it was on the factory floor, on a truck, at the site, on the building, we knew where it was and that they could actually get payment. And this was a big deal for the contractor. And then some contractors don't want that transparency, but in this case, it was crucial to guarantee that the building would be finished on time. Which brings us to the issues of tolerances. But I mean, the beauty of the weathering process for us was it did give us a quality that we really do believe reflects kind of this collage of color and activity. At least at the same time, it's got also been called a lot of other names. But it really has this kind of iconic, feeling about it that really, from all directions, is read very differently. But this is where it gets the last challenge on the project is like, you got to put these panels on a building. Is the steel in the right place? Are the connectors in the right place? We have a lot of parts of the building where we do have complexity. Components are different. And really, at the canopy, and that's the part that's focused, the canopy is 80 feet. It's about 120 feet wide, and it was cambered. Cambered so as material was added, it would slowly level out. The problem with that is that didn't tell us whether or not the connection points were in the right place. So we did a scan, and this is what we do now on all our projects, even the projects in Botswana. We scan the superstructure, and we take the digital model, and we overlay. And we can actually see in the model where reality meets virtual reality, and be able to go to the ironworker and say, well, that plate is in the wrong place, and we need to cut it out and move it. They did this in the first week and a half of the project. A few panels came down because they were just trying to learn the process. But after that, never did a panel ever come down that was lifted into place. And it was interesting. You got these big, heavy ironworkers, and you got Emily with her iPad, and she's just showing it to them. And they didn't think anything twice. They would just cut it because they knew that what they were getting was something that they could trust. And as a result, in about a 9-week period, they finished the canopy. It opened on time. And this is, and anyway, so when we talk about design, yes, we talk about art and science and math. We believe that these 5 variables have to exist, and for us, we believe, to have architecture. And at the end of the day, you know, that's a loaded word. And it's the sense that, you know, how do we take everything that we reflected on and incorporated into a vision for building a new tower in New York that is truly of New York? And this is what, this image for us is so telling. The idea of the city of the turn of the century, 4, 5, 6 stories, and the skyscrapers just coming to being. This is late teens. The Woolworth building is built in 1913. Towers of this period are narrow because of mechanical, because of daylighting. They are iconic. They have tops. They have crowns. They reflect a city that is of something that we all kind of think of when we think of New York. And then we get to post-war. Mechanical systems are much better. Floor plates need to be bigger because offices are bigger, and the morphology of the city changes. And what we really wanted to get back, and our client wanted to get back, is something that was really authentic, old school New York, and how we could begin to think about it in terms of its form, in terms of its materiality, in terms of its articulation. The challenge here, and this is now we're in the political realm now, landmarks. A historic Steinway building, a beautiful building, a building that, that needed to be not only restored but also celebrated, not covered up. This is the Rotunda on 57th Street. And the initial idea is, again, the client had bought the air rights of the adjacent property, and there was basically a void around the Steinway that you could place the tower in without necessarily building on top of the Steinway. And the idea here is that, well, now you're eradicating the architecture of the Steinway. You're basically hiding the building. And the concept here was, well, what about if we lift the building above the Steinway and we begin to express the architecture of the landmark? And this is where it gets interesting. When you start dealing with the Landmarks Commission, you expect, well, now you're building a tower on top of a historic building, but what you're doing is actually you're celebrating the historic building where it needs to be celebrated, down at the street. You incorporate a portal off the main lobby that brings you into the Rotunda. You create an 85-foot high retail space that really begins to celebrate the interior of the Steinway building. And then you create a lobby that's reflective of that period. You know, limestone, bronze, glass. You look at images of Hugh Ferris and the idea of what, you know, the setback, the texture of these towers, and how do you begin to think about how that could start to inform the ideas about this tower. And the idea that you do have sky exposure, you do have setbacks, but how do we begin to take this idea of setbacks and feather it into an architecture that starts to inform the texture of the building? Yes, these are very nice units. They're loft units. You get off the elevator, you got a great view of Central Park. You look south, get a great view of lower Manhattan. The structure is quite simple. You have a central core. You place all your lateral shear wall structure outboard. And this is really where we start to think about the materiality of the building, because the north-south faces we want to be open, but then we want to celebrate old materials, but in a 21st century way. So we take the idea of terracotta and we begin to take the grain of the setback, and we start to think about how we can create pattern, a moire that starts to capture light, that begins to really talk about the materiality of this old material. And this is basically a rain screen system. This is not a mortar joint system like Woolworth, but these are actually 26 unique die shapes that are suspended off a frame. And they change as they move up, and you'll see in this period, you can see the joints don't align. They're slightly off. And at this scale, that's not what you worry about. What you worry about is like the overall reading in terms of how the light and the shadow hits the building and how it disappears into the sky. And then ultimately the experience. And yes, look, we do affordable housing and you also do the high end. I have to say, there are not a lot of architects that do affordable housing, and I'm talking about capital A architects. And I think that's something that has to be, but the thing is that you go through both realms, and the thing is, for us, affordable is no different than this. The energy that goes into a project that's affordable, rental, or high-end is the same. Same principles, same notes. Our goal is everything should be in architecture at the end of the day. And this relation to the south, the crown, the top fifth of the building is basically the air just blows through it. It has a mass tube damper. At night, it becomes a beacon. I don't know if Greg would have shown this one yet, but this is the actual mock-up. This facade is well underway. You can start to see that these are open joints and that they're not necessarily aligned. And at this scale, you'll never see it. And at night, Central Park. Yes, it's 1,400 feet tall. It's about 5,500 square feet per floor unit. You get far higher up, it becomes duplexes, triplexes. But I would live there, but I mean, I can't afford to live there. This could be interesting. It is out of the ground, and we're expecting it to be topped out, sometime in the middle, towards the end of next year. So, look, I still think, even though I think we're going to go through some economic shifts here, I think it's an amazing time to be an architect. I think the opportunities out there in terms of how you engage, other challenges beyond building. But for us, we are just so energized by the experiences, the opportunities we are given, and at the same time, you take on any type of challenge. And I mean that. I think that's, whether it's, working abroad in Nepal on building a new school, or project in Botswana where you initially get off the plane and say, you really going to work here? To, doing a high-end tower in New York. It's just the energy and the questions that get asked and how you work that and how the design process starts to inform a logic in terms of how you arrive in an architecture is something that is just really drives how we think at SHOP. And again, thank you for having us, or having me, and that's it. Yeah, sure, yeah.
Bill will take questions. He'll even maybe lease one of those units out to you, the last tower. Maybe not.
I have no.
Okay. We'll let people. Hang on. Questions. The faculty will ask lots of questions, but you should ask questions too. Yeah? You'll have to ask a question for. Oh no! Wait! There's a student question. Just scream it.
Yeah. For example, like in the porterhouse, do you kind of start by like working out the sizing and then kind of work out the sizing after that, or do you know that the zinc panels have to be cut at that size and that's what informed the overall?
No, when we chose that material, we contacted suppliers. VM Zinc was the one that we ended up going. It was the size of the raw material that determined pounds, 1 by 3 meters. And then we developed the paneling from that. Yes. Well, the thing is that,
Just so that you all know what she asked, could you
Yeah.
repeat? Because we shouldn't have.
well,
one.
just the
What was the
question.
question? Where does theory come in?
Where's theory coming in? And again, you're working in a practical environment. You have clients. And then it's not to say that we aren't doing sidebar R&D research, but really for us to make it valuable, and it tends to work better when it's more real. So when you work with clients like Google, where you're exploring something together and you start to understand, like, well, where are those social strategies? What are those and how does that affect the landscape of the architecture? That's kind of like a kind of a get out of jail card free, where you get to actually get paid to research and develop concepts and frameworks. In this particular instance, this client is involved in developing a significant part of a city, and he needs a catalyst. But he doesn't know what it is, or he doesn't know what it should be. And he doesn't know, but to a certain degree, he's got institutions that are interested, but they also have their own agendas. And so how do you begin to conceptualize that, but not on like a program, but more on a very much a higher level in terms of like, well, what are those institutions, what are their vision statements, what are their programs, how does that fit into the bigger picture, and ultimately, is this a topography or a typology that starts to inform you in other areas? The innovation districts themselves are very theoretical, because the developers who are going to build those are excited about the idea of this new, I hate to say product, because that's what it is. The problem is they're all using the term innovation. And they, in some cases, it's a bling word, and that's where it gets down to, like, from a theory standpoint, how do you begin to understand what are those ingredients, what are those menus, and then how do they play out in an urban programmatic context? And that's what we're spending a tremendous amount of time trying to understand. You know, there's certain things that we do know because we're seeing it in existing cities, and cities that are kind of rebounding, and we're taking certain levels of those and bringing it in. We're working with Google's Project Cities, and they're doing it, and that's all theory, but it's theory linked to data, and as a result, it might not happen for 10, 15 years, 20 years, but these are the building blocks that get us to think down directions that we typically wouldn't without having all these other variables in place. So it's hard to do it in a vacuum without having like real problems to solve, but when you do have it and you're able to kind of explore it on the terms of architecture, social planning, urban planning, and technology, that's where it becomes exciting, and that's where you get something that you didn't expect you were going to get at the end of the day. I don't know if that answered your question.
Julia, you had a question?
Thanks for the lecture. The work's great. You said something really provocative at the beginning, which was that it doesn't matter what the building looks like. What it matters is the experience. But undeniably, your work has a certain appearance, if we talk about the Barclays Center or the project in Botswana. So can you talk a little bit about your aesthetic agenda?
Well, I would say that there are buildings that I even just personally in our work that to me are not pretty, but they are within our agenda, and actually in terms of, and then when I mean aesthetic agenda, it is about craft ultimately, and how you use technology to arrive at craft, not in the traditional sense where you had artisans and guilds that educated craftsmen that we had hundreds of years ago, but how do we take technology and basically allow to use a labor force that maybe doesn't necessarily know the craft, but begins to start to learn it through a process of communication. And so it's like not focusing on all the complexity, but focusing on making the perfect cut, the perfect weld. So for us is that we don't like the idea of applied materials, fake. We like something we can touch. Look, we've traveled, even before I was an architect, visiting Carlos Scarpa or Frank Lloyd Wright or Mies. Those moments, it's whether you like those buildings or not, they were real in terms of their construction, in terms of the material, in terms of these relationships of space. And for us, at least for the five of us, we kind of measure ourselves in terms of that realm. I grew up in a 1732 farmhouse, and my grandfather, on our dad's side, grew up in a house designed by Vincent Kling. First house he ever did, prairie style. And my mom's parents grew up in colonial. And we would see these two relationships, and you're trying to remember, well, you got this super contemporary 50s, 60s furniture in this super contemporary house, and then you got this kind of colonial style house, and you're trying to, but they all had an impact. And I think with Greg, his uncle was an engineer, structure, and all these play in terms of like our understanding of experience, materials, and craft. And that's the thing is that, you got to go to architecture. You can't look at it in a picture. You cannot experience it. And it's obviously something that, nothing against the students in this room, but I honestly believe the best decision we all made is we didn't go into architecture after we graduated. We spent 10 years doing something else and traveling. We all traveled, spent a lot of time, and we kind of backed into it. Chris backed into it because the lecturer in physics at Dickinson talked about space and time in architecture, and suddenly that's what I want to be. With me, it was visiting some, falling water in that moment. I said, and with Greg, so we all kind of did this stuff because we weren't ready. But through those experiences, it started to develop this kind of, repertoire of space, material, craft, and then started to say, well, how can we get out there? Because we can't afford to do it anymore. We got to work with what we've got, and that's where the focus has been. The challenge I would say that a lot of people have in some sense, well, your buildings are all different. Well, we don't believe in the idea of style and form making. We believe in a process that gets us somewhere at the end of the day we didn't expect. And I think Mitchell Park was the first learning experience. If you look at the design of the competition and you look at what it is today, it's night and day. And what it is today is thousands of times better than what it was then. It's even the project here that potentially, it will go through that same process, this kind of process and collaborative process, not only with the users, but the people who will make it. And so for us, it is a real freedom. We're not fixated. We're not prescribing. We're kind of like open to it. But we do know what we like. We know what materials we like. We know what space feels good. We know what structures are right. But at the end of the day, it is and that makes us comfortable, actually. You should have anxiety at every moment, because if you don't, you probably don't have the right answer. But it does allow us to step back and kind of constantly question the process. And for us, that's a very satisfying place to be.
Okay, 2 more questions unless there's only one. There's one of them right there. You need this? Okay.
No, shop solution is the shop should have just built the project. Shop should have just. The problem is that we still have a political process within the construction industry. It's the problem with modular in New York and some of the cities, and it's not all just the unions either, is that they're being built offsite in a factory, which is actually for quality control is much better anyway. The issue, it does draw boundaries that make, that within the construction industry is somewhat uncomfortable. That's one of the other thing that, though, we've had problems with, and this is the primary problem, is that if you're going to do modular, you have to believe in it like nothing else. And we believed in it, our engineers believed in it, Aaron believed in it, but the builders didn't believe in it. And the sloppiness, the logic, and then we were not, we actually tried to negotiate that contract. We were high. Well, we knew we were going to be high because we knew what it would take. And we didn't get in. And a lot of these mistakes were a direct result of just not understanding or making the investment to really put your heart into it. And look, it's going up now, and it's going to be a great building. And in terms of affordable housing, it's going to be a place that's going to, it's going to have the largest green roof in Brooklyn to look over in terms of the Barclays Center. But I said with modular will happen, but everyone has to get on board with it if it's going to be successful.
One more.
Thanks for a very nice lecture. Given your own experience, the way your firm works, if you were going to design an ideal curriculum for architectural education, what would it include?
Well, the studio would be in a different country every semester, because I'm telling you, you go into the eye room in Botswana, it's just, I mean, they've just reinvented, the work environment. I mean, it's just, it's the tough thing about architecture school. And then when I went to Columbia, I only focused on studio. I mean, I had all the engineering. I had to take history of architecture because I had no history of architecture. I got out of that by building models for Ken Frampton. But basically, it was all focusing in studio. And the only thing I had problems with is the fact is that we sucked ourselves into vacuums. We just like, well, what's this professor's kind of looking for? What is the theme? And so if I was going to set up an institution, there would obviously be a base camp. But the idea is, and that base camp would be heavily in technology. But the goal is to take the studio across many cultures and boundaries and kind of like develop an architecture. Yes, it's really easy in this day and age. Develop an architecture that responds to its location, responds to its workforce, and responds to culture. And then I think that would be quite exciting. And my experience working abroad, in whether it's Kenya or Botswana or Melbourne, Australia, or China and India, it's been exactly that. I've left those experiences thinking about things very differently. And I can say my partners feel the same way.
And Bill would hire me to run the school.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you again, Bill Sharples. Thank you, Shop. Fantastic lecture. Reception.